There are stories that chill you to the bone, not because of supernatural horror, but because of how painfully real they are. Stories where ordinary lives hide secrets darker than anyone could imagine, and where justice hangs in the balance between friendship, betrayal, and truth. Tonight, I want to take you deep into such a story. The case of a woman who lived loudly and unapologetically online, who thought her voice could never be silenced, and yet one day, that voice went quiet forever. This is the haunting case of Lisa Stone. Lisa Stone was unforgettable. Born and raised in Texas, she was the kind of person who stood out in any room, even if she wasn't trying to. Sharp-witted, sometimes blunt, and always outspoken, she said exactly what was on her mind. Friends loved her for it, though sometimes it rubbed people the wrong way. But whether you liked her or not, you remembered her. And she had a passion that burned deep, her love for animals. Her home was always filled with cats and dogs, many of them rescues, and she treated them like her children. Her life wasn't perfect. She had struggled with jobs, she wasn't financially secure, and relationships hadn't always worked out. But if you looked at her Facebook, you'd never know the struggles were weighing on her. Her profile was full of posts, updates, late-night rants, funny memes, animal pictures, and conversations with friends. For Lisa, Facebook wasn't just entertainment, it was her lifeline. It was where she found connection, validation, and support. She posted constantly, and people had grown used to her voice filling their feeds. But behind the screen, Lisa's personal life was more complicated than her online presence suggested. For years, she lived with a woman named Sherry Henry. Sherry was older, more private, more controlling. Their relationship was something of a mystery. Some believed they were romantic partners. Others thought they were simply longtime companions bound by circumstance. What was clear, though, was that their bond was intense, sometimes loving, sometimes volatile. Lisa, strong-willed and outspoken, often clashed with Sherry, who seemed to prefer secrecy and control. Still, despite the ups and downs, Lisa and Sherry stayed together. Friends couldn't quite understand it. They saw Lisa as a free spirit, someone who longed for independence, yet she seemed tied to a relationship that wasn't entirely healthy. No one knew just how dangerous that tie would become. It all began to unravel in June of 2010. Suddenly, Lisa's Facebook page, once buzzing with activity, went completely silent. No posts, no comments, no funny quips in the middle of the night. For Lisa, this was unthinkable. She had built her world online, and for her to vanish without a word was not just unusual, it was alarming. At first, friends thought maybe she was taking a break. Everyone needs space sometimes. But as days turned into weeks, concern turned into fear. They called her phone, no answer. They tagged her in posts, silence. And then came the terrifying thought, what if something terrible had happened to her? What made this case unique was what happened next. It wasn't family who first sounded the alarm. It wasn't neighbors or local friends. It was her Facebook community, people who had never even met her in real life, who decided they couldn't sit back and do nothing. They became known as the Facebook detectives. Strangers scattered across the country, united by a growing sense of dread, who decided they had to figure out what happened to Lisa Stone. They started digging. Some drove by her house. Others tried to contact her directly. They messaged Sherry Henry, asking where Lisa was, but Sherry's responses were odd, vague, and unsettling. She said Lisa had gone away, that she didn't want to talk to anyone, that she needed space. But that didn't make sense. Lisa lived online. She would never just walk away from Facebook, not without telling her friends. The more people asked, the more defensive Sherry became. At times, she even lashed out, insisting everyone leave her alone. But the Facebook friends wouldn't let go. They began calling local police, filing missing person reports, and demanding an investigation. It was unusual, law enforcement receiving calls from people hundreds of miles away, insisting that a woman they only knew through social media was in danger. At first, police weren't sure what to make of it. But the consistency of the concern, the sheer number of calls, made them take a closer look. When police visited Lisa's home, they found Sherry Henry there. But Lisa was nowhere to be seen. Sherry told officers Lisa had left, that she was fine, that she didn't want to talk. But her story didn't add up. The house itself raised questions. Lisa's beloved animals were still there, unattended, unfed. Anyone who knew her knew she would never abandon them. That detail alone set off alarm bells. Meanwhile, the Facebook detectives kept gathering information. They documented every odd response Sherry gave. They took note of Lisa's sudden silence. They created timelines of her last known activity. They were building a case, piece by piece, from behind their computer screens. And slowly, the pressure they created forced the investigation to move forward. Police began digging deeper into Sherry's story. Neighbors reported hearing arguments in the weeks before Lisa vanished. Others said Sherry seemed oddly calm, even hostile, when people asked where Lisa was. Search warrants were issued. Evidence was collected. But there was one haunting problem. No body, no crime scene, no proof of what had happened to Lisa Stone. Still, suspicion continued to build. Sherry's behavior grew stranger. She limited access to the house. She avoided answering questions. She gave inconsistent statements. And slowly, investigators began to suspect the unthinkable, that Lisa Stone had been murdered and that Sherry Henry was hiding the truth. For Lisa's online friends, the fear was crushing. They had never met her in person, but they had grown to love her through her posts, her jokes, her rants. They felt powerless, watching from afar, hoping that justice would come. And as months passed, hope of finding Lisa alive began to fade. The case dragged on. Without a body, prosecutors struggled. Sherry Henry was eventually arrested on unrelated charges, possession of a firearm by a felon, but suspicion of her involvement in Lisa's disappearance never went away. Friends, family, and strangers alike believed she knew exactly what happened, but proving it was another matter. The tragedy of Lisa Stone's story isn't just in her disappearance. It's in the silence that followed. A woman who lived so loudly online, who shared every detail of her life, was suddenly erased, leaving only questions. To this day, her body has never been found. And while many believe they know who's responsible, true closure has never come. But there's something powerful about what happened in her case. For the first time, an online community of ordinary people, complete strangers, came together to raise the alarm, to demand answers, and to push an investigation forward. Without them, Lisa's disappearance might never have been noticed. Her story might have been buried and forgotten. Instead, it became a chilling reminder of how digital connections can reveal real-world dangers. Lisa Stone's story is heartbreaking, haunting, and unfinished. She deserved more than silence. She deserved to be found, to be heard, to be remembered. And through the voices of her friends, both those who knew her in person and those who only knew her online, her memory continues to live on. So as you sit here listening, ask yourself, if someone you cared about vanished without a word, would you notice? Would you fight for them, even if no one else seemed to care? For Lisa's friends, the answer was yes. And though justice remains elusive, their voices made sure her story was not erased. Lisa's life reminds us that behind every social media post, every status update, is a human being with a beating heart, a complicated story, and a need to be seen. And Lisa was seen. She was loved. She mattered. And even though her voice was silenced, tonight, her story still speaks.